Well, I'll try to pull together the statement as best as I can recall, but this meeting is being called pursuant to Governor Hochul's emergency decree. So this meeting has been noticed for a Zoom and remote access. We have posted notice of the agenda. We've given access to the public. This will be recorded. And this probably, at least at this point, looks like it'll be the last meeting that we will have remotely. But in any event, we are calling the meeting together properly and legally pursuant to the emergency order. And so we'll get going. That is usually done much better by council, but then again, they charge more. So our first item here is an informal appearance before the board. This is for BAUCO, 6 Conte Lane. This is an application for a site development plan approval, subdivision amendment, clearing grading limit line, steep slopes, tree removal, stormwater management, and erosion and sedimentation control permits. So we last heard this, was it March or was it last fall? I thought it was last fall. Anyway.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I believe it was in September.
I thought so too, yeah. So anyway, they gave me wrong information here, but that's okay. Anyway, Alan, good to see you. Thank you for all the good work that you've done in providing us with some updates and alternative studies. So why don't you lead the charge and we'll take it from there.
Okay. If you'd like, what I could do is go over the changes to the plans first, or would you like me to go over the alternative plan?
Why don't you do
the alternative plan we're not interested in. So I'd rather go through the changes.
Well, I think
there's significant environmental impacts.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful
with that plan.
What would be helpful, I think, is if you basically knock out, frankly, the alternative plan and give us the reasons for it, which I personally thought were very compelling in your write-up. But I think everyone should hear it and weigh in on it, and then we'll go into the changes.
Sure.
Let's spend more time on the changes, I think. But anyway, we'll go from there.
I'll start with that alternative plan just so you can see it. I will also hopefully be able to share. That would be definitely more helpful.
Yes, you can share.
Is that visible?
Yep.
Excellent. Wonders of technology. Are you going back to in-person meetings after this?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It was bound to happen.
I'm just asking. I was curious. From your discussion, I was wondering. So actually, when we last met with the planning board, it was September 8th. The board had requested an alternative plan to show how one might use the travel way. The travel way is located here. Hope you can see that. That's the dirt travel way. This is the dirt travel way that was used by the builders of the Conte Lane subdivision to, I'll use the term, essentially dump their rock pile and soil pile, it's kind of rocket soil, into the property from the other 4 houses of the subdivision. And all the travel ways about 110 feet long, about 10 feet in width. And you can see it there. The rock pile itself is kind of like through this area of the property. That's what was used by this access to create it. And as I said, I think it's our opinion in reviewing this plan that it has very limited use for the access to the house. Because only a very small portion of the travel way, it's about this much, about 40 feet would be used. The rest of it to provide access to the house within the setbacks of the property would not be able to be used. It would also, if we use the entire dirt travel way, we'd have to relocate a fire hydrant, which serves the other houses here. And that too is I'll say a significant impact to have to relocate a fire hydrant. This is shown so one would be able to avoid it. But in doing that, and we're showing grades along here, what it would take in order to create this, we will be able to retain the hydrant in its location. What we noted too is that in order to really make this happen, the house is in the same location as it was before. It seems like the logical place to put the house. It creates a lot of walls would need to be created in order to make this happen. you can see there's a wall along the, north is kind of this way. So for the purpose of the drawing, I'll call it north is this way. Along that north or northwest corner of the house, it's a long wall in order to make up the grade change, because in flipping the house, there are a couple of doorways and access ways out here. And even if you wanted to, you really do need some access. Even if the wall were to be here, it's still a very extensive amount of wall that would be required. And the other thing we noted as well was that in order to grade for this, for the driveway on this side of the house and provide access, for example, to the septic system, because you need to be able to do that, because the grades are so low in this little valley, for what it's worth, you'd have to construct a large retaining wall here as well. I'll also point out the wall height along this southern portion of the property would be roughly 5 to about 8 feet tall. And here it actually goes as much as 12 to about, maybe even, it goes to about 12 to almost 15 feet here. So a lot of wall would be required. And I think that's a significant detriment to this plan in order to sort of be able to create it. The other point we wanted to make as well was that in its current orientation, one we're presenting as our preferred alternative, there's a wraparound porch that would be actually located here, but we sort of lose that ability to have this sort of the sunroom on this part. There's a sunroom located here, but actually be located on the wrong side of the house in order to be able to take advantage of just a natural orientation of the site. And that's pretty much the I'll call it the major detriments to this plan. I guess it's primarily that it still involves extremely extensive amount of grading, large walls, and only a very minimal amount of this travelway would be usable. It's already, I'll just say, it starts off the travelway itself. When you review it, it's around 10. The grade's around 5% at the eastern end when you first walk in, but then it gets very steep. Goes to as much as like 18% at the western end. So that's why it takes that much grading to sort of make it feasible, if you will, in trying to, rework this plan in order to get it to work. And I'll just say our preferred alternative, the one we presented, it lessens, significantly amount of walls that would be required. So that's kind of like how, our review of it came about.
Okay. Dick, Eldad, Tom, any thoughts or questions on alternate one, or are you convinced that we really should just move on and look at the preferred alternative?
I see. I guess I'm getting more with Alan on this one. It does sound like it's a lot of extra work and extra money to do it the way we'd like to have it done. So I guess now we should, from my perspective, let's go look at the other one, unless anybody else has other comments.
No, I'm the same. Let's compare.
Okay. Tom, you're okay with that too?
Well, I just would like clarification on something, because I'm looking at there is a diagram which was very helpful in the submission package, which is called a drawing, which is called attachment 1, which is essentially just a diagram indicating where the building, the driveway would be, and the retaining walls, which I think is a diagram of the preferred alternative, unless I'm mistaken, Alan?
That is correct.
Yeah. So I'm just adding up the retaining walls there: 82, 56, 31, 64. As opposed to the retaining walls in the alternative, it seems to me there are actually, as far as I can tell, there are fewer retaining walls, less retaining wall, unless I'm mistaken. So
But the retaining walls are also taller.
I'm sorry?
The retaining walls in that alternative design are much taller.
are taller because of the
Yeah,
grades.
they are. And as I said too, this design takes more advantage of the solar orientation of this house. Whereas, by flipping it, what here on this side of the house is the sunroom and takes advantage of the afternoon sun would be lost, unfortunately. So yeah, I agree with you. There, both plans do have walls. A lot of these are actually kind of small in their overall height. And it's really just to create some level areas in the yard. The other one is really needed just to be able to have a usable site. And so I think that's one of the differences. When you look at the heights of the walls, they really are quite moderate on this.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
But I understand your comment. And, I'll just say I looked at that too.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. It's very
Okay.
helpful.
All right,
So
thank
we'll
you.
go to the preferred program and see where we are.
Okay. I'll start with I guess I'll start with so the preferred plan does still have the driveway essentially leaves around the same location. And then accesses the garage on this side, the sunroom on that side, the decking over here. And there's a small retaining wall for the backyard here. There's a retaining wall along here, and I'll show you where that plays in. There's a couple of small walls here, and that's really it. There's one small wall on this edge over here, just where the driveway comes close to the, that's the east side of the property. I think one of the differences on this plan is that we have moved the stormwater management facilities and brought them into one location. Previously, we had one. I'll just show you. This is the wetland buffer line right here in green. And previously, we had them really crowded right up against the wetland buffer line. But by sort of reconfiguring that, we're able to increase the distance from certainly from the stormwater to the wetland buffer line. And I know there's a wall here and a limited disturbance. It comes as close as 2 feet, but over here, it's about 17 feet away from the wetland buffer line. So that was one of the modifications to this plan that we did. I'll also point out that we did modify the driveway grades in accordance with the town engineer comments. It may not be all that obvious when you look at it, but it does comply with the town regulations. And I think the other modification I just want to go over with the board, because a lot of the time we spent talking about clearing, grading, limit lines. And this in red, in that sort of red stipple, is the clearing. This is drawing C106. That was the clearing and grading limit line that was presented in the 1993 plan. So it was very limited. The odd thing to my way of looking at it is essentially followed this green line here, which you could see is the wetland buffer line at that time, how it was noted. And based on reviewing of the plans, that wetland buffer line seemed to be actually following the 496 contour. There was no evidence that it really was based on an actual flagging of the wetlands. So it just seemed to follow the 496 contour, and then 100 feet off of it, that was it. And it still involves some disturbance within what was then perceived as the wetland buffer line. So on this plan, one of the things we're requesting, and this boundary here shows the clearing grading limit line. It's the red stippled area from the filed map number 25713. What we're requesting here is a modification of this. So this serves as our map of the amended clearing and grading limit line. So what we're requesting is, I'll just say it is an additional area here to be added into it. And there are some reductions. That's kind of like the purple areas here. Those are actually rock areas, and it's beyond, some of it's rock like on here. But, and also we're requesting, the additions to it are shown in green. That's these two areas. And primarily the request for this modification is being made for two purposes. One is to install a septic system, because we have to meet, in the 1993 septic regulations were certainly different from than they are presently. The old septic system was just located up in this area here. And I didn't see really any evidence that it included, I'll say the full 100% expansion area, or is much smaller in size. So what we're proposing will be, and this is what was presented previously in 2005, and the plans were reviewed by this board, a septic area up here in this portion of the site, and the stormwater management facilities are to be located here. And I'll just point out in the 1993 plan, the stormwater management facilities included 2 dry wells and no treatment of runoff from the driveway. And the dry wells were just for runoff from the house, from the roof runoff, and that was it. So this really are what the changes to the plans are that we're presenting here. I know there were a lot of comments that we had received from the town staff, and to that end, I know we responded to most of the comments regarding the plans that were submitted back in September, or were reviewed back in September of 2001.
Alan, do you expect that the county will ask you to clear the expansion area at this time?
I don't believe so. And I think what I would do, obviously, is just make the formal request not to. My recent experience with them is that when it's fairly remote from it, it is not a requirement to do that. And there was no fill that was needed in that area either. So I think that will, there was no fill in either. So I mean, the soils here were generally pretty deep. So I think what will happen here is that we should be able to have it remain wooded.
Okay, so if you don't need that, would we be able to amend the clearing and grading limit lines inward and basically use that the green boundary there and pull that last almost rectangular area out all the way to the south out, or no?
My only concern would be that if that means if the septic system fails, they'd have to come to the planning board in order to amend the map.
My concern on it is, this is a very, very strange looking lot. And that area wraps around the neighbor. And if there is no reason to clear all that woods behind the neighbor, I think the neighbor and we would probably prefer to keep it as natural as possible, maybe pull it out of the clearing and grading limit line. We certainly understand if the county comes back and says we need it, I mean, we have to follow the county's rules. But that's a concern for me because that has characteristics of a unpleasant backyard for someone else where it wraps around that way.
No, I get that. As I say,
maybe
my concern. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe one suggestion I would have is, we could put a note on the plan that says that that the only reason for which that area is allowed to be cleared is for the expansion if needed.
Yes.
That way it's protected from, being cleared for yard purposes or et cetera. But in the event it is needed for septic, it can then be cleared.
Yeah, I agree. That means also that there are fewer trees to chop down at this point.
Right.
Right. I'm fine with that. And I think Mr. BAUCO would be
Yeah,
too.
yeah, no issue with that at all. We have no intention of touching any of those trees back there.
Terrific.
Okay.
Great.
My only concern again would be that if in the event there was a failure of a septic system, to have to go to the planning board to be able to amend a clearing grading limit line in order to construct something. Usually they're, when you use an expansion area, they're usually done pretty quickly. So the delay would be a concern of mine. That's all.
Alan,
I think the suggested note,
the
note suggestion makes a lot of sense.
Sure,
Right.
That's fine.
So we could just move on, right?
Yeah, I think we can tailor language that will give you cover Because if the county directs that we have to do it, we'll do it. That's fine.
Right, the 100% expansion area is here. We could
Yeah.
do just chop it off here and just say, this area
Exactly.
is going to be cleared in the event that the 100%
Yeah.
expansion area is needed.
Right.
Period.
So it's like a contingent clearing and grading limit line that would extend if you need that contingency.
Sure.
Alan, is the dirt pathway going to remain?
Not really, because it's going to be somewhat graded and then revegetated.
Because one of my, I guess a bigger question is with the option that you prefer, your client also, how are they going to get past all of the underground piping that's in the back corner? I guess that would be, let me see, where's north? Can't find
Let me
north.
just see what it
Okay,
is.
so if you
All right.
show the underground stuff, so you have underground stuff here, and then you have a building. Are they going to be able to squeeze trucks through that area to get to the septic system to clean it out?
I believe so. I mean, we're not really regrading it to any, real extent. Some of the grades are being brought into here basically to meet up with the grades that are a part of the travelway. So it'll somewhat disappear. So what will happen is the grades in the front yard will meet up with here once this rock pile is removed, and it will drop off to this valley between here and the neighbor's lot. And trees that are being proposed they're proposed along the boundary of it, the edges of it. So this will remain open enough to bring a vehicle through here.
All right,
for
that's
access.
important.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Good. I see that Sabrina's not here right now with us, but she had some notes here. Those were, we're talking about the changing to the clearing and grading limit line. I don't think there's any objection to what the other areas that you designed, for the septic and the stormwater. But of course, you're going to have to quantify that and set forth all the measurements on the map. Confirm location of stormwater BMPs. I think you've done that, but Bob will check that. And then Dennis will check on the confirmed mitigation for tree removal. And then the other issue is this, there's a lot of rock that still has to be removed from the site even after you take care of this rock pile. I think Bob's got some notes on that as well, some issues. It just has to be removed. So, it's, fortunately, it's a relatively short road and you're on a state highway, but I guess we need a little bit, we're going to take some precautions on that as well, I think.
Sure.
Were there any other things in Sabrina's note that might have caused you any question at all, Alan?
No, there weren't.
Okay. Bob, do you want to go to your note?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I have a few comments. Like the chairman just mentioned, concerned with the amount of material that has to be removed in light of the fact you're going to use most of the rock for the stone wall. You still have about 1,560 yards. Do quick mathematics, that's about 97 trucks. My main concern is the traffic and the truck traffic entering onto Somerstown Road, which is a State Road 133. So I'd recommend that you put some sort of construction warning signs down there, notifying the traveling public that you'll have trucks entering the roadway and exiting the roadway. You may want to get a DOT permit on that as well. That's GC1. GC2, we discussed that already, but basically, obviously, if the planning board is inclined to approve the new clearing and grading limit line, obviously, Alan, you'll have to prepare a new map and a declaration, which will be reviewed by town council, will be recorded down in the county to memorialize the new grading limits line. GC3, general comment, basically you have about 5 retaining walls on the preferred site. I would recommend that you specifically state what type of walls they are, i.e. Versalock or stone masonry retaining walls. GC4, the Versalock retaining wall is basically a generic wall section. I'd recommend that you get more detail in there with the dimensions and the type of geogrid material in the back and just make it more site specific than basically just a generic Versalock segmental retaining wall. And also GC6, the proposed primary surface is a gravity system. However, the proposed expansion would require pumping. And this was a question, I don't know if you can answer it. Has a configuration been reviewed and accepted by Westchester County Department of Health at this time, Alan?
We are still working on that. So it is something we have to pursue. But obviously, in order to get a building permit, or at least get a C of O, we have to have the, certainly for a building permit, we have to get it approved. So.
Okay, very good. With that all being said, I have no objection to the above comments being put in, incorporated into the planning board resolution as conditions of approval. And ends my comments for tonight, Chairman.
A quick question for, yes, go ahead, Dick, please.
I have a question. What size trucks are going to be going down the, the road to the state road? Is that road going to be chewed up?
I can discuss that with the commissioner. If it's going to be chewed up at the entrance, the state might be concerned about it. And I would imagine you'll have to get a street opening permit from the commissioner on that too as well. They'll probably note that, Dick, and probably put some sort of bond amount in it. So if something does happen to the road where they have to make the turn in and turn out onto Somerstown Road, that would probably be in the bond itself for the town to protect that roadway. And the state might require something as well when they get the permit.
Right.
Okay.
So
my last comment is make sure that none of the trucks hit that fire hydrant, right?
Yes, well, we'll definitely keep a good eye on that, and we'll certainly know if they do hit it. But I think to answer Sabrina's comment, she put something with stormwater. Alan did sections on the stormwater. They meet all the minimum depths from the bottom of the gravel to the top of the groundwater or rock of 3 feet, which is required by DEC for water quality measures. So the location that Alan shows is a good location, and it meets DEC requirements as well.
Good, thank you. I had a question about the walls. I guess the proposal is to use this Versalock, and yet it seems like you have an abundance of rock on site. Couldn't we use that rock instead? Wouldn't that be easier? So you have to truck less around, and you don't have to go buy Versalock and use this as readily available.
Right. I think, Mr. Chairman, the only place we were considering using the Versalock wall was, I'll say, at adjacent to the driveway, at the end of the driveway. In this location here was it. The only location, because that's about 10 feet high, and it varies from 10 feet down to about 0 here. That was the only place we're considering the Versalock wall. All these other walls located here would all be constructed using the on-site rock.
Okay. All right. And I guess the Versalock affords a better level of what, assuredness that
Stability.
they won't fail. Yeah,
Stability over. Yeah, I mean, the other walls are generally pretty short. I mean, they're like a couple feet. I mean, this is 524 and 522 on this side. 514, 510. They're all like 4 feet high or so. Even with they're generally short walls, but this one is as much as here. This is the only location where it gets pretty tall, and so that's why I'd rather have the stability of a segmental wall.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Dennis, you had some thoughts and questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In summary, it's just, I guess a question of botanical accounting, and I know it's tax season and I don't want to go through the whole memo because I'm sure no one wants to hear more about numbers at this time, but I think it's something that probably Alan and I could, just work out in, doing a coordinated review of C-104 and C-105 just to make sure, as a QA/QC check of each other, because I know our numbers were different. And, upon a agreement, with respect to replacement requirements, both in planted form and in contribution to the tree bank fund, we could easily incorporate that, as a condition into the resolution. So that's not an issue from my end. I don't know if Alan is amenable. We could obviously do this at another time. to, go over those specifics.
Sure, that's fine.
Dennis, you were kind enough to forward that copy of a memo from a neighbor from last March. So there was some concern about the large 22-inch oak at elevation 529. I think that was along the driveway. So are we taking appropriate precautions on that to make sure that that's not impacted? I think the plan is that it's not to be cleared, but are we going to make sure that that will survive?
So, I mean, typically when, the sites are sort of prepped for, erosion controls and, we do, at least I do, a pre-cut inspection as well.
Yep.
To, just verify that the trees that, were included on the plan are those that are going to be removed. And obviously sometimes, there's a little bit of give and take. Sometimes one you realize doesn't have to come down, and then this one, does. And in addition to that, I'll, sometimes walk around and, things, look that they're going to be in a pathway of construction vehicles or, at risk of, being hit from swinging arms of machinery and whatnot. We on site, we'll at least I'll require, some form of tree protection, A, around a tree, and then B, if there needs to be fencing to avoid, driving over an area for, root compaction and compression of soils, we can, we could do the same. It's, it's something that, we certainly institute at the time. I mean, we could have, the specs on plans to show what these things would look like. They're usually generic in nature, and, there's multiple methods, so long as at the time of, just before the shovel goes into the ground, that's, when we try to make sure as best we can to protect everything that needs to be protected, and what needs to be removed is clearly marked, and there's no confusion between the two.
Okay. And I guess we have a planting plan, and as far as we can tell, the planting plan is consistent with what the neighbor to the east was talking about. I think it's fairly close range there between the driveway and his property, so I thought he had some good thoughts, and as long as those are incorporated, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they both certainly desired a green screen, and the neighbor I know was considering some other species, I guess, from a growth form perspective. Yep. But I'm a little hesitant to sort of recommend specific species if this applicant's design profession is recommending other species, and they're both going to achieve at the end of the day a green screen. If the recommended species don't survive from the neighbor, but it's on this property, I tend not to, unless it's so vastly different, I tend not to, mess with those details usually, to be blunt.
Okay, good. Any questions, any other questions or thoughts from board members?
I have a question about the landscape plan. Dennis or Alan, could you just review for us for a second, the balance between trees removed and replacement trees? Where are we on that?
That's a landscape plan here.
Right.
That list is there. And this was the list of tree removals.
Right.
And the calculations of it. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Question is, are you balanced between the trees removed and the trees you're replacing?
Well, we do have a balanced by caliper inches or whatever. No, we're not. But I think that was one of Mr. Corelli's comments. Dennis said that 63 replacement plantings are proposed, and I'll just say that we would have a contribution to the tree bank fund as a result, because it's a wooded site to start with, where we clear out is essentially either front yard, septic system, stormwater, or driveway or house. And so that's one of the reasons that there is this imbalance, if you will. But, you know, we are proposing the planting of some trees. By the way, I'll just point out that this is the 100% expansion area where the trees are to remain. The trees are shown being removed from there. But we are showing, oops, some trees to be planted by hand along the wetland buffer line and in there as well, just to augment it. But beyond that, you know, the travelway stays open. We have a septic system. We have future septic system here potentially. And, you know, so I think we're providing a lot of shrub planting, both for foundation and.
Well, Alan, getting back to my question, you say that you haven't actually balanced it on site, that there would be a contribution of some kind to the tree bank to make up for the deficit. Is that correct? So the question is, how big is the deficit?
I'd have to take a look at that. I don't know the number offhand. I'd have to take a look at that and see.
Alan, I think the expansion area, those trees were not marked for clearing, so I don't think those were the ones in your calculations. Looking at the map, they're not X'd off.
Correct. They're not.
Okay.
Well, we have no intentions of moving those, so.
No, of course, yes. I thought you had said before that they were earmarked for removal, and it was part of.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
So I said we have 254.5 caliper inches is the required replacement, and we are planting 160, I guess, caliper inches.
So you're about 100 off. You're about 30.
So we were.
You're about.
So I calculated that we were 94.5 caliper inches in deficit, which is 38 trees, and that's our contribution.
So that's about 30% of roughly. I'm not that good with math. 30 or 40% of the total number of trees would not be caliper inches. Is the, I guess, technical way to put it, would not be replaced on site.
That sounds about right.
I'm just wondering.
It's about 30%.
I'm just wondering if that's good enough.
Well, you know, we went through this before with the planning board in an earlier time when we showed much more extensive tree planting, and that plan was questioned by this board as to perhaps what you could do is show fewer trees going into that 100-foot wetland buffer within the DEC and town wetland. So we did take this avenue before, and I'll just say it was questioned by this board probably about 9 months ago.
Okay, thanks for that history.
So I think we came to a happy medium here where we're showing extensive shrub planting in front of the house, planting of a lot of trees. And yes, there still is a deficit, but I think in the end, this will be it'll be well, it'll be well provided, is what I'll say.
Well, let me, I hear you. Could you go back to I have it here in front of me, but maybe it would help if you would go back to the new proposed clearing and grading limit line diagram.
C106.
Right. And the current wetland buffer, right?
The current wetland buffer line is here.
Correct. So I don't see in your plan, forgive me, let me look at your plan again. There is an area which is within the clearing and grading limit line. which is between, let's see. I guess I'm suggesting that to the right of the property, on the right side of the property, below the wetland buffer line, there's an area there where you're putting some screen planting in and a few deciduous trees back in there. Isn't that an area where you could do more?
Are you referring to this area here?
Yeah, and yes. And up and right up in there.
In this area here?
Yeah, and to the left of that. Oh, that okay. So that's where your drainage structures are. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Let me just, if I can just.
The stormwater is here.
Right. So let me just tell you why I'm pursuing this line of questioning. I think that there's a principle that I think the planning board has in the more recent past, but has been trying to promote, is that when we take trees out of a tree canopy area for development, that we try and replace trees where we can on site to maintain that canopy or extend that canopy. And the important point here is that trees just shouldn't be seen in isolation as just a tree, right? They're obviously contribute to as a canopy ecosystem. They contribute to everything else: habitat, drainage protection, a whole host of things. And so I think that the goal is to find a way to do minimum damage to the tree canopy by replacing trees on site that would contribute to as much as possible to the trees that are being taken out. So that's where that comment comes from. And I know that the Conservation Board has been looking at this particular issue, and it looks like they may come up with some recommendations for the town board on that's in the future. It's nothing in particular for you to worry about right now, but I think it's an important principle. And I don't see any reason, unless there is a reason why not to put trees there and not put them as cash contributions to a tree bank. I'd like to know how that might be done.
Appreciate your comments. I think what you're going to find is that in places like here, for example, that there are, I recognize that sort of for clarity's purpose, this doesn't show the existing trees to remain. But if you look at, let me just see if I have it here. For example, there are a number of trees that are going to remain in this location to maintain that canopy. Whoops, sorry.
No, I'm looking, I understand. I'm looking at that, not that one. I'm looking at the existing tree survey, the next drawing. I see that as well. And it's hard to, it's hard to make a judgment on this without actually being on site to see, what could be put in, what could be done. Maybe there aren't trees, maybe they're shrubs. I think that perhaps Dennis, maybe Dennis has some information on this, or would like to maybe go out and take a look again. But I really would like to know if there are real reasons why this can't be, the trees couldn't be, the canopy and the understory couldn't be supplemented there in order to make up for what's coming out.
Okay, I think it's a fair comment. I think, Alan, if you could work on that with Dennis and see if there might be a way that you can look at that. And it seems to me also another issue might be, I mean, if this stuff is hand dug, and if we use wetland, trees that like wetlands, whether it's tupelo or something like this, don't mind having your feet wet. Perhaps even that area could be extended. I don't see anything there, and some that out toward the point of the property. So just, again, take a look at it and see. I think it's a very good point. And we always prefer to see the trees going rather than money going to the tree fund. I'm not quite sure whatever happens to the tree fund, but anyway, if you can take a look at it, I think that's a very good point, Tom.
Well, the other question would be, and I'm looking to see what the species are recommended for the replacement trees along the property line that is in the wetland buffer, 3 CP.
It's basically things like pin oak, red maple,
Right.
plants
So-
like that, which are quite adapted to these situations. Really on the buffer that supports Florida, but that's Nyssa sylvatica over here as well. So there are a lot of plants which are well adapted to it.
Good.
Okay, so the question I have is, what are the species on the other side of that property line that are actually in the wetland area?
The wetland area too is a lot of red maple.
Okay, very
One of the
good.
top species there.
Yeah, so you get my drift. It would be good if whatever you put, I mean, that property line, as far as the trees are concerned, is an arbitrary line, right? If we could find a way to, what we're putting in that area be an extension of the trees that are already naturally on the other side of that line,
Sure.
would be great.
Okay.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Just as a, I'm sorry, just as a, one last, we hear sometimes that when a development is approved and the crews come in and take trees out, people complain. They say, why are all the trees coming out? Why do all these trees have to come out? And it's a very fair question. And that's what we are here, and not just the planning board, but people like Tom DePole and Dennis and the ERB, and the town is really has the obligation to have a really good, legitimate answer for that. And I just want to be sure that the planning board is in a position to have a good, legitimate answer for that question, should it come up.
Right. And, further to Dick's question, I guess you've got some trees that on the south side. I see them. Okay. It's very difficult. I'm looking at 2 different maps with 3 different maps at the same time. So anyway, okay. You understand the point. So we have to go to public hearing on this anyway. So if you can just give us those details and try to supplement as much as possible, or reasonable,
Yes.
that would really be helpful. Any other questions or comments from board members or applicant or staff that I've missed? If not, we have to schedule this for a public hearing. So I guess we need those relatively minor changes. I don't think it should be very time consuming, should it, Alan?
No, should be fine.
So Felicia, what does it look like that we can do in terms of scheduling this for a public hearing?
Well, the principal thing I see here is that we have to do, there really is just the tree counts is what you're really looking for.
Tree counts and maybe supplementing the landscape plan with some additional trees. But for the most part, obviously, we're going with your preferred proposal, obviously, and
Right.
working with that.
Right, thank you.
Bob?
I think, yes, I think Felicia does not have a voice.
Just as a point of not just trees, but trees and shrubs, as might be appropriate working with Dennis.
Yep,
Sure.
good idea.
Thank you.
I can't read that, Felicia. What?
Use hand signals.
Felicia, use the chat and then we can
Yeah,
verbally say it.
sort of like planning board charades.
She have laryngitis?
No, she's lost her electronic voice, I think.
Oh, good. All right. So she's not ill.
Sorry about this.
Can't hear you.
March
Did it come through?
28th deadline for April 19th meeting.
Is that okay, Alan?
328 for,
April 19th.
April 19th.
sure.
Okay,
Yes.
terrific. Great.
Great.
We'll see you then.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you
thanks
so
very
much.
Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
all right, very good.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Okay, very good. We move to our second item. This is the REINMANN 15 Bessel Lane. This is an application for a site development plan approval for the construction of a swimming pool and the revision of clearing and grading limit lines. This is at 16 Bessel Lane, 15 Bessel Lane, excuse me.
Hi, I'm Mary Scott. I'm representing the REINMANNs. I will share my screen. That's okay?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. All right, so. Okay. Back up a little. So. Okay, I'm going to show you what's in your packet, and then I'm going to show you some things that were added today.
Okay.
You know, the paperwork. Here's the site. So, this up. So the REINMANN's house, the end of Bessel Lane, it's like 2.6 acres. But it is, you know, you can see a lot of trees, driveway coming down, and kind of the only usable areas for any kind of development in the yard, the septic area, which can't be touched, and a small area here, which is grassy and bordered by a stone wall that was built by the previous owner. So we are proposing a small 650 square foot pool that will kind of hug this rock outcropping here. The issue, and just to show you some pictures, so this is the grassy area that's available. This is where we're proposing to put this little pool. It's quite a large rock, so it kind of hugs here where these chairs are now. Let me show you this. Here's the survey. So this is what we're proposing. This is the area of the septic, and as you can see, a lot of driveway and hills going down. I'm going to point this out because this comes up later in the conversation. There is a stone swale down the right side. So when the house was built, the wetlands were designated on this line, and it was a 100-foot setback that was this line. The wetland setback has increased to 150 feet, which now takes up most of the driveway and a chunk of the house on this side. And we'll talk about wetlands in a minute. But so you see, this is where we want to develop. Let's see here. It gets a little smaller. These are the engineering drawings. I think the relevant one is, oh, okay. So the other thing is the clearing and grading line. So here's the clearing and grading line coming through on this line. And where we're proposing putting the pool is right here. So it spans the clearing and grading line.
So it's already a lawn there outside the clearing and grading limit line now.
It is. And there was a retaining wall built by the prior owners somewhere prior to 2014. We don't know exactly when. So what we are proposing is to build this small pool, kind of hug it to the rock outcropping within that existing wall, and to compensate for the 1,500 and something square feet we would be taking within the clearing grading line and reparked it. I'm not exactly sure what the correct term is here. Basically move the grading line, clearing grading line to here. And so the area is a little over 1,600 square feet that we would be putting within the clearing grading line.
And that area that you would return to clearing and grading limit line doesn't seem like it's usable anyway at this point, right? It's a very steep cliff going down.
It is not usable, and honestly, there's not a lot of usable property anywhere within
Right.
this property. It's
Yep.
the septic, and it's this little area here. And okay, let me go back a minute to the survey, because I was involved in a Zoom conversation this morning with Dennis Corelli and Bob Cioli and Sabrina, and something came up. So we had moved our wetlands line the extra 50 feet as designated in the original, excuse me, requests. What Dennis found out when he visited the site, this stone swale is actually a water course. And so if we were to take this as a water course, 150 feet from here would take 3/4 of the house. In addition, and I'm going to show you some pictures, there is a patio that was also built by the former owner down below. And there's some wet areas through here, which I walked today and I took some pictures. These are on the neighbor's property. But once again, when you take the 150 feet, we're taking a good chunk of the backyard of this house. One thing I would point out, so this property that borders them is over 35 acres, and it is accessed from Whippoorwill Road, which then goes into Wolf's Lane. So the actual residence is very far away. So I want to show you some pictures. Let me pull this down. Okay, so actually, I should make it bigger. So here's the house. The patio that I just pointed out is actually here. Let me get this a little bigger. It's actually here. So there's a little path that goes down. There's a patio that was built here. And then what Dennis discovered when he walked is kind of some spongy earth kind of along this line. Once again, this is where we want to put the pool. Let me get a little past here. So
Is that a concrete poured wall above the area that you're thinking about?
no, it's a dry stacked, and our
okay.
engineer did do a an evaluation of this, which is in the original packet that we submitted. So this wall you're talking about, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Not the cliff behind the house, but over toward the right hand.
Yeah, I mean, it
That's
kind of
what's
goes all the way across.
Mhm.
This was also done at some point by the former owner, and this fence was put up, and this fence is clearly outside the clearing and grading line. So in here, you can see, you kind of see it's a little damp in here. If you were to take this as your wetlands line, and Dennis Corelli has suggested that we get the wetlands mapped, you are within the 150 buffer, the whole back of the house. So we would definitely be within that. Let me just, but I want to show you this. So here's the Westchester topo. So here's that swale, that stone swale that goes down, goes past here, and here's where the patio is. And that damp area I just showed you, or, I mean, there's a lot of damp areas now because we've had melting snow and rain and whatnot. But anyway, it goes across here. So if we were to have it flagged, we would definitely be within 150 feet, all back here. from the property line. So this is all outside the property line. The property line to the house here is 101 foot. And from the property line to the wall, which would be next to the pool, we have about 85 feet. The pool elevation, or the elevation where the pool would be, is about 610. The elevation where that wet area is 575. So it's about 35 feet below. So I realize if you go by the letter of the law, yes, this is within 150 feet, but it's also quite far down. And in terms of disturbance, this is already a disturbed area. So it seems to me like a negligible request to put a pool here in a small area in a property that's 2.6 acres that has very little usable yard. And in terms of the disturbance, it seems to be minimal. And in terms of moving the clearing grading line, as I say, this is already past it. The clearing grading line is through here. And what we're hoping to do is to move it so that we add an area here and we kind of take back this space as usable land.
Okay, great.
Mary, Mary, I have a question.
Sure.
This swale is, it picks up the water from rainfall, right? Or is it running water year round?
I would doubt it. It had a small amount of water in it today. And we have had a lot of melting snow. And, you know, I think certainly during the summer it's dry.
Can I interject to answer that question, maybe to help? Could you go back to the photo that shows the trees and the wet area?
Sure. Let's see. This one?
That'll do. I think that one might. Let me see. Was there another one? I couldn't recall.
Let me see.
That one might be. That might be helpful. That one that was just there. So, you know, I have some familiarity with the area because there was a house that was being, you know, constructed on Bessel after a fire had destroyed it. So there's an existing pond sort of at that cul-de-sac of Bessel. It's associated with, I think I put it in my memo, there's two properties on Bessel, 16 and 12, that have that pond. It's a fair-sized pond. And, you know, the water that, you know, kind of runs through there, I agree. I'm not going to describe it as a running rapid, but part of the reason is because the other wetland that I feel also exists, which is, you know, upslope at the, if you want to call it, at the beginning of the swale. So the water that is dripping in there, and I'll get to this picture in a second, and the water that is dripping, and that's a fair description, because there's almost like a bowl area where the water that's, you know, fed from the stream that's coming from the pond that I just described, it really sort of opens up. And so it creates kind of, you know, this area, and there's like a bend in the rock as well. So there's this whole attenuation and pooling going on. So as that water, you know, starts to rise in elevation, as it gets above the point at which, you know, that bowl can't hold it anymore, it actually spills into what is, I guess, on this drawing labeled as the stone swale. But you know, it may be an intermittent stream. I know it was mapped on Westchester GIS, which is, you know, I don't take that information necessarily as absolute, but in consideration of what was going on nearby upstream of the swale and then further upstream of where the pond is, I mean, there's certainly a hydrologic source that would contribute to that flow. And now getting to the photo, you know, and looking at some of those trees, so I noticed these morphological adaptations of, buttressed roots or water roots. And you could see in the two trees sort of to the left, like when trees start having sort of that thickening at the base, those are the roots, the tree is obviously surviving, but that's the adaptation to try to sort of work your way out of, what is considered a wet condition. So I agree that, there's definitely a lot of, muddy ground, and, we certainly just had an event. But this condition to me doesn't really indicate an ephemeral situation. I mean, this is an area that is saturated for a portion of the growing season that I think, would lead to, what would be a positive, wetland determination. And I think some of that source is not just coming from what you see in the background of the house and the slope, but, proximal to that circular stone patio, I think there is some escape of flow, for lack of a better word, coming, from the stone swale. It certainly continues in its course onto the adjacent property, which is Rockledge Farm, from a past application, if that helps with your reference. But I think there's a fair amount of hydrology here. So I was hesitant, just from seeing the drawings, as depicted, and then walking out there. I just need a better handle on, the entirety of the situation and totality of the system.
Could I ask one question, Dennis, though? I mean,
Of course.
From this photo, so this is where the pool would be up here.
Right.
And taking into consideration that the safeguards for overflow of the pool, whatever, would be taken care of, what effect would that have on this area?
You're saying just construction of the pool, use of the pool?
Well, I mean, certainly in construction of the pool, we would take all the safeguards that you would take on any project to contain whatever debris and runoff and whatnot, so that there wouldn't be any. But I'm just saying,
right.
I understand what you're saying about this is a wet area and it will continue to be a wet area. But I guess my point is that our 650 square foot pool here will have little impact on that.
Dennis, can I interject for just a second? This is Jennifer Gray. Hey, I think, Mary, I think you're getting to, the merits of whether or not a wetland permit, if necessary, if required by the code, would ultimately be granted by the planning board. But I think we have the threshold issue of whether under the code a wetland permit is required. So even if we say, hypothetically speaking, that the construction of the pool had no impact whatsoever on the wetland, still, if the disturbance area is within 150 feet of a watercourse or a wetland, a permit is still required. And then whether or not there's impacts as a result of that disturbance on the wetland, that would, go to whether the wetland permit should be granted or not.
Okay. Well, and that's valid. And I guess my question would be for this board, if we could establish that we could move the clearing and grading line with the thought that a wetlands permit would be needed and we would go that next step, we would present that to the wetlands.
Well, and I think the other thing that Jennifer's alluding to is that when we normally consider a wetland permit, we're going to need to have the information in terms of distance. This board is frankly very protective of distance. One of the reasons why this is in an overlay zone was that it was determined a long time ago, I think through science, that steep slopes proximate to a wetland actually impact wetlands quite a bit. So any impact to those slopes or something proximate to the slopes needs to be looked at. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but I think what we'll look from you and the applicant is information to show us that the function of the wetland is not going to be materially impacted, or it can be mitigated, et cetera. So, that's the next step, but we need to know what the distance is. It could be that, we're looking at a location of a pool within 50 feet of a wetland within a 150-foot area. And that could be of some concern as a threshold. It's not insurmountable, but we would need to hear more from the applicant in terms of how that is not an issue. One thing that jumped out to me, sort of anticipating that, was whether or not the location of this small pool could be located closer to the home, closer to, it looks like it's relatively flat there, in the 614 area, and closer, not, obviously not on the air conditioners, but closer, so that we pull it back a little bit more into what was the old clearing and grading limit lines, and perhaps this mitigate some of the concerns that we might have even with a pool next to a wall. So again, that's something I think that should be considered, especially if it turns out that we are talking about a pool being located within 2 figures of the wetland. That is, less than 100 feet.
Okay, well, I mean, I think whether it's here or it's here, we're not talking very far apart. And part of the reason for locating it here was that we could kind of tuck it around the stone. And here we have a hill, so we were trying to avoid the hill. So we were going in the flatter part of the property and trying to.
The flatter part also looks to me, I mean, my sense is, and knowing the area pretty well, that's probably fill.
Absolutely.
I don't know how deep you're going to get before you hit rock, and so we're also going to be talking about chipping probably again in a wetland area. Again, impacts we're going to have to be looked at carefully. So again, I think perhaps closer to the building, up on the flatter, what is more fill might be less, but it's really up to you guys. I mean, take a look at it and see. It's you guys design it, but just some thoughts.
I just wanted to see. I thought there were some more pictures here. I guess here. So, I mean, as you can see here, this was the idea of where the pool went, because we do start getting up here. And this is where that stone is. So we definitely would be hitting rock here.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a logical spot to be able to fill in.
Well, I think we should probably take some, see what the depth to rock is at all these locations also, and see what you're up against. Because it might very well be that there's just more fill up here at the top part, and you actually have some more space. Who knows?
Okay.
So I have a question or observation anyway. Could you please go back to the view from the woods looking back up to the house?
Yeah, let me. Sorry.
Yeah, no, the other one that we were looking at, I think it's the next one. Yes, that one. Okay, that's great, right there. First of all, I guess I don't understand the history. Maybe it's in the documentation that either wasn't mapped when this house was first approved and built, or the wetland appeared afterwards as a consequence of, extraneous events. I don't know. I suspect the former is the case. I don't know how we missed it, but it's clear if you look at that rock rubble there and the level of the house above it, that that whole level up there is filled. It's been pushed into this wooded area in order to create the plot for the house. And that also, I think, applies to where the proposal is for the pool, because that's what the retaining wall is all about. So I think, we've already said that and recognized that. I thank you, Jennifer, for your clarification about, we really need to know, what the facts on the ground are before we go too much further in making, preliminary guesses and determinations about, what we might do or might not do here. But so I think we need to hold on all of this until we have that. But I'd like to ask a question, Dennis, maybe you can help me or anybody else. I'm looking at this forest floor here. And I spent a lot of time walking in the woods around here in a lot of different parks. And this doesn't look like a natural forest floor to me. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see any deadfall. It looks almost like it's been raked out. I don't see any invasive plants at all. You'd think in a wetland environment, you would be getting some rich understory. It looks like there's quite a bit of sun that does get down in here, especially from the house side at the edge. So I guess my question is, it's in the grading and clearing limit line, unless I'm mistaken. It's a wetland buffer. You'd think there'd be a lot more stuff going on in there, and there isn't. Am I wrong about that?
Well, when I visited, there was, I know, one specimen of skunk cabbage popping out by the beginning of the swale, and I see some other things. And I know I had mentioned, and this may be the case, during the height of the growing season, I had mentioned to Mary, I said, understand that when I was there, things are bare. Will it be bare as the season progresses? But to your point, I agree. Even in a good sense that there's not the understory of winged burning bush and Japanese barberry as the shrub layer, which are both non-native invasives. There is a lot of open woods, courtesy of deer pressure. But I agree, it's obviously fairly neat. I'm sure maybe remnant fall and twigs and branches are picked up, but I can't speak really to the colonization just from a one-time visit.
Colin, that's fair enough. The colonization, that's a more complicated question, and it would be good if there's a way to sort of understand that. Not having the invasive is a good thing, but if it's indication of somebody coming in here historically and taking everything out, that's a different subject altogether. And I understand that in a wetland, you're going to be getting these things which come up seasonally and then disappear again. And obviously that's all great, but I mean, I don't see a single fallen tree here. It's astonishing. Unless this forest is all so brand new that none of them have had a chance to age in place and fall over. I don't see any drop branches really. It just does not look like. It looks to me like somebody's come in and had a landscaper come in and sort of clean it up and clean it out. And it's just what I'm looking at that leads me to that conclusion. I have no facts about that, but if we are going to proceed on this, I think we need to be sure that we have some assurances that that's not going to be happening in the future.
Do we know when this photo was taken?
This afternoon.
Okay, well that speaks to more to Tom's point. I mean, the wooded area in my house looks like a disaster because of the winter and the storms and all that. And so Tom, it's a very, very interesting point. I have a sort of just a internal process question or code question. Maybe it's for Jen. When it comes to wetland buffers, if the wetland is entirely on an adjacent property, the buffer still applies?
It does, yes.
Okay. All right.
Bob, do you want to run through any of your comments?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Basically, on the plan that was submitted, I was concerned with the proximity of the proposed pool and the superstructure and the influence line from the load bearing that may affect the wall. I know there was some language the applicant's architect put down in the report, but me being me, I'd rather see it, with all due respect to the architect, come from the structural engineer in a plan and a sketch and stamp it with a seal and certify it to make certain that there's going to be no impacts to the existing retaining wall that's there, as far as an additional surcharge created by the new construction of the pool and the weight of the water and the construction of the foundation as well. So that's GC1. Usually the influence line is a line of where the loading would be transferred from the new loading from the pool. Generally, it's assumed as a rule of thumb to be a 45-degree angle. So I would recommend, Mary, to have your engineer prepare a sketch and a plan with that wherever the planning board decides to put this location of the wall, just to make certain it does not affect those walls. I'm not quite sure the structural integrity of those walls. They look like dry laid walls, but that's a critical element when you ever place your pool. That's GC1, GC2, wherever you decide to put the pool and wherever the planning board thinks it's going to go based on the new layout you may do. I would prepare a grading plan so it's very easily understood, the pool elevation, the grading around the pool, and especially relative to the existing grades and the retaining wall itself. GC3, I know it's a very limited access point to snake a vehicle in there when they're doing this pool. I'd recommend to protect the force main coming in. I know you had some plywood there. I'd recommend putting gravel over it and then maybe some plywood to pretty much level out and even out the loading on that piping so it doesn't have a point load on that force main and possibly damage it. That's GC3. And 2, since it's such a limited access coming from the driveway out front, with the close proximity to the septic, the on-site wastewater treatment system, OWTS, I would definitely highly recommend you show that cordon off so when the trucks come in to do the gunite, they don't run over the septic fields. Obviously, as everyone knows and discussed it quite often already, that they're going to amend the clearing and grading if the planning board is inclined to decide wherever the applicant wishes to put it in the future. Just keep in mind, you'll have to prepare a map for the amended clearing and grading limit line and submit a declaration to town council for the review to memorialize this forever and ever down in the Westchester County Clerk's office. And those are my comments for tonight, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Mary, you have Sabrina's comments also? I don't think
I
she's
do.
back yet. So obviously it's a type 2.
Here, Mr.
Oh, you're
Chairman.
here. Oh, you're here. Okay. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, and from a planning perspective, the coverage requirements are conform, the setbacks are being adhered to. It is a zoning compliant plan as it is right now. There are some around the house, there are some topographic challenges for the board to be aware of. And, depending on where this ends up in the long run, there will be changes to the clearing and grading limit line that you need to discuss. So it really is trying to gather all the information regarding the wetlands, whether or not it needs a wetland permit to really move forward on the application.
Right. Also, Mary, the next time you have the maps, can you show the neighboring parcels where the neighboring homes are on the neighboring parcels?
Oh, the homes. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So just to kind of capsulize, next step would be to get the wetlands flagged and put on the survey.
Yeah, and then depending upon the results, file a wetland application, and then we would move forward.
So would we do the wetlands application before coming back to you or after coming back to you?
That would be part of coming back here.
Yes,
Okay.
you would want to submit it before. And you want Dennis to go out and verify the flags before you survey them.
Okay. Can I get a sense of if we do all this and, we get our wetlands, are you inclined to favor moving the clearing grading line or not?
That's a premature question. In my mind.
Okay, just kind of wondering, how to
I think that's almost a less important issue than knowing what we're dealing with here in terms of, do we have a wetland? What's the buffer? How far away are we back from? And
Okay.
then where is going to be the preferred location of the pool based on trying to find out, where the fill is and where the rock is. then you got some other, very tight considerations. I mean, I don't know how you can access this thing. It's very, very difficult, but that's your issue. So I think the clearing and grading limit line, from my standpoint, will follow once we get more information. So again, to Tom's point, I think it's premature, but I don't think that is I don't think that's a major issue.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Dick, Eldad, Tom?
No, thank you.
Okay, very good. So we'll wait to hear from you in terms of when the application's filed, and then we can move forward with the next hearing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I just ask one question? I apologize, just because I don't have a lot of, I just want to make sure we're doing this right the first time, or maybe now the second time. Mary, are you 100% confident you understand exactly everything they're asking for? So we get all the information done once and we don't have to do this another 2 or 3 times?
Yeah, I mean, so basically we're starting with mapping the wetlands, getting that put on the survey, having Dennis take a look at it, and doing some test holes so we see what the depth of the fill is by the rock and where we want to put the pool.
As long as you understand, I just want to make sure there's no ambiguity around what we're asking for. So when we go back and do the work and Dennis comes, we come back with answers to all the questions.
Thank you, Adam.
And if
Okay.
there's things I've missed, let me know.
Yep.
The board. So.
Okay. All right, good. As long as everyone's in agreement, I just want to make sure we're all clear. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Okay, our next item is a request for an extension of approval. And this is for the Fox Hollow Sewer Company Riverwoods Community Association, Croton Avenue, Mount Kisco, New York project. So this was something we approved recently for a site development plan, wetlands permit, stormwater pollution prevention plan, last heard on December 21. Bob, do you want to give us an update in terms of what's going on with the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I've been working with Daniel Collins for the past month or so. They're pretty close of pretty much satisfying all of the conditions of approval for the site development plan signed in by the chairman. I'm going to look at it this week. I should be bringing it down for your signature this week, Robert. The second part they have to do is the building permit. I think I can have Daniel maybe chime in on this a little bit, but right now their biggest hurdle right now is going through the Westchester County Department of Health to get approvals on that. We had a meeting up there today, but they are making very good progress for the plan signing portion of the project. And I will give it over to Daniel if he wants to explain the Westchester County Department of Health.
Sure.
That's okay, Chairman.
Sure. This is Dan from Hudson Engineering. Yeah, we had our meeting today with the health department. We're looking to tie everything up. It was actually very productive since we've been, we got their last review memo back in, I guess it was February 22nd or February 18th. So we're on the way of addressing all their comments. Once that's all approved, we're going to obviously go sit down and begin to go through all the rest of Bob's comments regarding the building permit application and get this thing moving. So it's progressing along nicely, and it looks like we're going to be there soon.
Very good. Okay. Is there a motion to grant the applicant the extension that they're seeking?
So moved.
Second,
Second,
all in favor?
Aye.
yes.
Aye. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Any opposed? No. Okay. The motion's carried 4-0. Very good. Okay. Good luck, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Have a good one,
All right.
guys.
Very good. Thanks. Our next matter is a discussion item. This is the proposed legislation regarding the alternate board member legislation that the town board's considering. We had a conversation with the town board at our joint meeting, so I think we got a better sense of what the town board has in mind. And any thoughts or questions on the revised legislation that was in our packet?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
When I look at A on page 2, I guess it is. Yeah. 6.6/6-3A. It's not enough. It's not clear enough exactly how this works to me. certainly if somebody is unable to attend for 2 or more consecutive meetings, I can see that we would want notice of such an event occurring, a week in advance. If it's gonna, how do we get somebody up to speed, I guess is my question. How do we get someone up to speed who is an alternate? And if it's what kind of notice can we ask for? Not that we would get it all the time, because there would always be emergencies. And second, on the recusal, how does the recusal work? If it's I would assume it's a recusal of a particular project, and that the member who is recusing himself from that would still be eligible to go back on the dais and have his say on other projects. So I'm not sure whether we need some more discretion for the chairman to work this out, type of thing. And we may have changes that we want to have, of course. We've mentioned this before, but that strikes me, it's vague.
Well, I'd say the recusal is clearer to me, because that, and I would suggest that the recusal applies to usually just a single matter. I guess it could be an entire evening, but usually it's just a single matter. So
Right.
I think it's pretty easy. And I think after that particular matter is heard, then that person, the regular member, would resume sitting on with the board.
Which would go on the dais, and the alternate would leave.
I presume that's, exactly.
So that, I agree, that one's more clear to me.
So the other is, and I guess the town board tried to make it clear, but two or more consecutives. But I think, again, my understanding on this, Jennifer and Sabrina, is that the state law is also very, very loose and leaves so much of this really to the local town to work with and enact, and it's not really hard and fast. And I think to a certain extent, I would use that as a guideline, and then because I never know, I don't think anyone really necessarily knows that they're definitely going to miss 2 in a row unless they're going on a trip, an extended trip. We've had that in the past, and it might be useful then. So I think that one's a little bit more difficult. I agree with you, Dick, and we'll just have to play it more by ear. Jennifer, is this a situation from your perspective that it is mandatory that if we get notice of 2 or more that we must have an alternate sit, or is it still discretionary?
I think it's still discretionary, and I base that on the language that says that the chairperson of the planning board may, not must or shall, but may designate an alternate member. So ultimately, Bob, it's within your discretion as to whether or not it makes sense in the particular circumstance to designate an alternate, but it gives you the authority to do so if you think the circumstances warrant it.
Okay.
And the way I read this, it basically, the way I read it, it says that the town board can authorize up to 2 alternates, and then the chairperson, whenever they see fit, because of either a recusal or absences, can kind of pull them up, call them up to the big show. But other than that, I mean, they don't participate in any way. Is that right? They don't speak. They don't have a vote, obviously, but they don't get to ask questions. That's the way I read this? Is that fair to say?
I think based on the discussion that we had at the joint meeting, I think that's the intent. Yes.
I think it would be. That's the way I read it, also, Eldad, but. That doesn't seem to be reflected in language here, and maybe there ought to be some clarification. I don't know, but that's the way I had understood it. The other part that I understood was that these alternate members were expected to attend these meetings, even though they don't speak They don't have the opportunity to speak unless they are designated by the chairman to fill in. And either by being in the room, I guess, or they are allowed to Zoom in. But in order for them to be up to speed on the issues and the applications that the board is hearing, out of fairness, I think, to the applicants, I think that that's probably the intent. I think it's reasonable that that would be the intent. I'm not sure that it says that all designations of voting privileges to the alternate members shall be noted in the minutes. And the same voting privilege as regular. I don't see necessarily about anything about attendance in any way of these alternate members in order to be sure that the role is responsibly filled. And I don't know whether need more language here or there's some other way to assure that. But I think it would work best if that were the case, that was put in place somehow.
Well,
it could be that the town board will give those kinds of instructions with the appointment of someone as an alternate, that the expectation is that you will either attend or monitor. I mean, you don't have to be there physically, but watch it, as you said, Tom, Zoom or by television or tape. And I think that would be expressed, and I think that would be a minimal expectation.
Well, right. However, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that if I remember the rules for the state rules, that the planning board actually could select the alternative, or the alternate, I should say. But that doesn't bother me. I would suggest that if we have alternates and then we want to say, well, you may be called, certainly if they come, I would say as a citizen, they can ask permission to make a comment if they're not actually the alternate. So I would think that's still a right that would be there, and that might be helpful to them because they would understand more. But I would like to see the chairperson having more prerogatives as to how to structure the use of the alternate, and that would depend on the knowledge of the alternate, but more importantly, it would depend on how long is this hiatus for the regular member going to be.
So Dick, to your point, perhaps what I would recommend is you can go back to the town board with your comments about putting a little bit more detail in the language about, to Dick's point, notices of, the minimum notice for if someone expects to be absent, details about whether the board member is going to participate in each meeting, expected attendance at each meeting, and alternatively, or even with that, include another provision in this local law that specifically gives the planning board the authority to adopt rules and regulations concerning the administration of the alternate members for the board. So in the event the town board does not include the detail that you're looking for, you would have the authority to amend your rules of procedure to, to structure how the administration of the alternate position is going to occur.
Golly, you always were able to twist my words into something that's coherent. I think that's really wonderful. Thank you.
So Jennifer, on page 2, it's 6.3b. There is some language here which I think it covers a lot of maybe what we may be concerned, what I was concerned about, which is all provisions of state law and local law relating to planning board membership, including but not limited to training and continuing education requirements, shall also apply to alternate members. And I think that the state law talks about the legitimate reasons for removal of a planning board member might be continuing education, but also have to do with attendance. And so does this language not cover the attendance concern that I had, that they are, other than they will not be voting and they will not be participating in meetings, the attendance clause still applies to them?
I don't know off the top of my head what the town law, the New York State town law provides with respect to membership requirements for, specific for planning board members regarding attendance, participation. So I can't answer that off the top of my head, but it's something that we can look into.
Well, attendance and participation is not in the state law, what I think, because I read this often. But and my memory of it is that the right of a planning board, of a town board, to remove a planning board member, one of the justifications for it is lack of attendance. And so I guess what I'm trying to suggest is anything we want to put in here about attendance is probably already covered in this language.
It may be. I just can't verify that on the spot right now. Yeah.
So, I don't hate this, but I remain, sort of, let's say, underwhelmed. Like in the sense that I didn't really understand its purpose, and I understood a little bit better when we met with the town board. That was interesting. The idea that I heard, the point was to capture some of the enthusiasm that members of the community showed over the last year plus, and I think that is a very, very admirable goal. I worry that this won't capture that enthusiasm. And in fact, as described, I think this is, I don't know exactly how to say this, but this feels like this position has almost all of the negative aspects of being a planning board member and none of the positive aspects, in the sense that I could see them sitting for an entire year. The appointment is for a year, right? They can go a whole year without having to say a word, but being required to watch every single moment of our meetings, which obviously people can do now. And so I just, I don't know. I still remain not sold that this is necessary or a good idea or the best way to go about this. Again, I don't hate it. I don't know that, it's certainly not going to do harm, I don't think. But I don't know that it gets at what it intends to get at.
Well, let me just throw something out there in regards to harm. It will be more costly depending how this is structured and implemented for an applicant to provide the materials, right? If this person needs to attend every meeting, it is asking for more copies. It's we get a lot of applicants who don't want to provide the copies we're asking for now.
Yeah, I think I agree with Sabrina that I don't want that. That's too much of a burden for, as Aldad suggested, I'll twist his words, that they may learn to hate it if they have to, do everything and still not have a word about it. So I would say it's a question of having the chairman, say, okay, this is how we're going to work this. If you're available, we'll give you some documents that Eldad would have had, or he could just transfer them over to you for, not requiring that any more copies be made, and go that way. And I think that's where the prerogatives of the chairman would help, make this be smooth and something that people would be interested in.
I guess here's another thought about this, and I think everything everybody said is really right, spot on. I'm still not against it though, because I do.
You don't hate it. That's an improvement over Eldad.
No, I also said I don't hate it, to be clear.
No, Eldad didn't say he hated it.
I'm sorry, Tom, for interrupting.
No, that's okay. But I wonder if there could be another use for this. Maybe we ought to require of planning board members, and Bob, I don't know whether, because I don't sit in your chair. Boy, am I glad I don't sit in your chair. I never could. And I'm so grateful for all the work you do behind the scenes that we just never see. And a lot of it I don't want to see, it's like making the sausage. But I don't know if it's, and you don't have to answer this question, and I don't want you to. But I don't know if when somebody says, a planning board member says, geez, I'm not going to be able to make the next meeting, calls you up and says, I'm not going to be able to make it. I just want to let you know. And I'm not going to be able to make the next 2 meetings, and lets you know. Or this is something that just happens. It just happens that the person doesn't show up, or you hear about it at the last minute. And I wonder if this is a safety valve for the planning board chairman to maybe exert a little bit of influence or some mechanism to get a full board when that happens. Even when it turns out that somebody, says, I can't make the next meeting, and then the next meeting they don't make that one, the next meeting they don't make that one. Obviously, it's up to the town board to decide how to deal with that particular situation. But is this a stopgap for the chairman to have the authority to come in and say, well, we're gonna get a full board somehow here, and work it, use this alternate position or these alternate positions to do that?
Well, I'd say that the notice on when folks can make it, very often it's an emergency situation. Sometimes it's a medical situation, illness. It's all different kinds of things. The things that we don't see very often, and especially in the last 2 years, it's almost foreign to us. But people used to travel, and there were times when people would tell us that, look, I'm going to Europe, and it's going to be over 2 meetings, as it turns out. Not that I'm going to be there for a full month, but it's going to be just the timing over 2 meetings. I can't make it. So we've had that in the past. And sometimes we might have someone traveling, and then there might be a holiday in between also. So there might be, for some reason, we get advance notice that someone is not going to make it for 2 meetings, maybe even 3 meetings. I don't know if we've ever gone beyond that. But anyway, that would be when we normally get advance notice. Normally, Sabrina, I think you and Felicia get the notice usually a couple of days before, I hope. Sometimes less, I guess. Sometimes no notice. And, sometimes it's just an MIA. I mean, sometimes I've sent a note to Sabrina.
Oftentimes it's no notice at all.
Right. So, sometimes, you worry sometimes, is everything okay? Because we didn't hear and someone doesn't show up, and just want to make sure they're okay and nothing horrible happened.
So I guess another way to put the question would be, in the absence of notice, right? Could the chairman have the authority to have the alternate member sit until there's a more of a guarantee or a commitment or something for the designated full member to come back on board and engage?
Yeah. Well, this language, I think, would prohibit that, because it talks about more.
Right. So I think it would prohibit that. And I think it would probably be seen by the town board as an overreach. And that would be a legitimate concern of theirs. But it seems like there maybe is a mechanism here to easily, somewhere downstream, to have already in place an alternate member who is up to speed on things and knows how we do things, so on and so forth, for any eventuality that might occur.
Well, and again, if we have advance notice, to Eldad's point, I think it would be something that we would be calling upon someone to participate more often. So it might be something that would be more rewarding for the alternate member.
Yeah, instead of warming the bench just to wear the letter sweater.
Right. I mean, I think Eldad makes a very good point. The way it's drawn right now, it's not terribly unlikely that you could have a person sit there for a year and not say anything. And that's, I think that would dampen enthusiasm.
Well, I guess with all those sort of observations, I'm not against it. I think that in the end it could be a good thing. I think the reasons are good, as we understand them, and I think the language, for my part, probably pretty much covers it okay.
Okay. Eldad, any thoughts, any further thoughts, or Dick, any further thoughts, or what do we want to send back to the town board, if anything? I guess we don't have to at this point, but we can just say we read it, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty neutral on it. It's fine. You know, we could also, I guess, try it. I don't know if that's a bad approach. But you know, I feel like once it's on the books, it's on the books. But so you know, I'm neutral on it. You know, it's you know, to Sabrina's point, will it, you know, cause more cost? But that cost seems mostly to be borne by applicants. So another copy. I mean, if we think it's the right thing to do, I'm not that. I don't know if that in and of itself prevents this from moving forward. But again, other than that, I don't see too much harm in it. I mean, I just wonder if the enthusiasm that the town board is trying to capture will not be captured by this. That would be my concern.
Yeah, I think I agree that it's the one point that sticks out is sitting around for a year. You know, granted it's only, you know, like 20 to 23 meetings we have every year, but that's if you're not really going to be able to engage in it, it's boring and people will walk away. And then, oh, is that going to be a penalty against them? You know, if they're an alternate for 1 year and after 3 months they're not coming to the meetings because no one's using their services. So that whole thing is vague. We could try it, but I don't know. We have to pick somebody that's not burdened with a real life job.
So I guess this is one of those things that I believe it's a town board's initiative. I thank them for polling us on this and asking us about it. And if they think it's a good thing to do, I don't think it's a bad thing to do. I think this is one of those things that's either going to rise or fall eventually based on its own merits. That either people are going to stay engaged for a week and for a year and it'll all work out fine, or it won't. But I certainly have no reason to suggest to say that it shouldn't be tried.
Yeah, we can make it work if the chairman has enough latitude. Yeah, we can make adjustments if that's allowed in the words.
Well, the only issue is the 2 or more, it seems to me. And remember, the reason we did that also was out of fairness to the applicant. We wanted to make sure that, you know, the person who was taking a vote or hearing on something really had been there before, and we didn't want to have a decision in any way that could be subject to a challenge because someone wasn't up to speed and they should have been. So remember that was one of our concerns, and I think that's why the town board was talking in terms of 2 or more. So we'd have someone with a little bit more weight on a given application. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think that was the consideration.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's a good idea to have an alternate. I don't know if you need 2, given, you know, our history has been pretty good with getting a quorum.
Well, it's up to 2, isn't it? I don't know if they necessarily will appoint 2, but I guess it gives them the ability to appoint 2 if the town board so chooses.
I don't see any harm in I mean, once you're going to do 1, I don't see any harm in 2. Only I think the only downside is the one that Sabrina brings up, which, and you know, myself being an applicant or in front of the town twice, I think that we need to be cognizant, or the town board should be cognizant of the cost of these submissions for applicants. It can get pretty cumbersome as it is.
So is it fair to say that the sense is that you know, we're okay with it and it's worth a try, and we'll see how it works, and it may not work, and may require revamping or just non-use. Again, there's nothing that's going to require the town board to appoint these 2 alternate members if they run out of interest or run out of people.
So yes, If we're gonna send them, you know, a 3-page, I'm sorry, a 3-sentence thing, I think that's great. But I do think that there might be, we might want to raise Sabrina's caveat, because again, one of the things that we have been trying to do at the urging of the town board to try and make things easier for applicants and how we proceed and the way we, you know, the way we do things. And not only in terms of efficiency of time, but efficiency of money.
Yep.
And this has a potential of going the other way. And they perhaps ought to be thinking about that if there's a way to mitigate that somehow.
Yep. And to Jennifer's point, it might also be something that we can look at within our own rules in terms of what we have to do. Again, we can learn from that perhaps, and we just adopted our rules recently, but we certainly can amend those in terms of what has to happen in terms of number of copies, if any change whatsoever. And to Dick's point, you can dish them out to different people if we know that someone's going to be recusing themselves on a given application. No point sending them a copy of an application that they're not going to hear or can't hear. So again, I think we could come up with some rules on that that are reasonable and work through that.
Okay, good.
So we'll put together a short little memo saying, basically give it a try and see how it works out. Report back to the town board. And I'm sure they'll hear from Bessel too. Okay. Sound fair?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next item is what I think is the main attraction of this evening is the discussion on the North Corridor. So as we all know from our joint meeting, we had a discussion with the town board, and I think it's important for us to try to differently perhaps than last time around to try to get as much support to the town board as possible.
Say, Bob, excuse me, we're having audio problem with you.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's probably fading a little bit. Maybe I'm fading. Anyway, trying to capture the excitement and the enthusiasm from our last meeting with the town board. And what we propose to do is, we're supposed to have discussion meetings every other meeting, the planning board. So not to the point of overexhaustion, but what I'd like to do is at least have this on the agenda, each segment that we take a look at every other planning board meeting, so the second meeting of the month, and carry this out until we can really get something back to the town board. Obviously, you're going to be working on this as well, and it'll be important for us to coordinate it so that we're in tandem. But I know Tom sent a note to everyone, and I thought that trying to arrange, by the way, again, thanks again to Sabrina. I mean, I put together a fantastic collection of information, tables, comparisons, which I just thought were so impressive and so helpful. Really hit the mark and will help us tremendously here. So again, many thanks to Sabrina for showing that. It's all extra credit that you don't get on the blue book. But in any event, many thanks. That was really good. But Tom sent in a note, and I thought that made good sense to try to be a little bit disciplined as we undertake the study. And Tom's suggestion was that we take a look at the segments, the retail, the affordable, mixed affordable housing, multifamily residential, and then building heights. And perhaps these things will feed into each other as we move forward. And I thought Tom suggested that just taking, for the heck of it, starting with retail and talking about that in terms of, the needs, costs, impacts, demand, etc. Trying to work towards some sort of idea or concept to give to the town board in terms of what we think might be the right number, the right field, the right amount. And where. So anyway,
is there any way to improve your audio? It's
I'm sorry. Yeah, is it
challenging.
Okay, I will try to speak up. I don't know what's going on. It's usually not that bad.
It's not you so much as your technology.
It's my technology, yes. Yep. Okay. So anyway, how should we begin? Who wants to start? Who wants to talk? By the way, are we in agreement that that's an okay way to go about this so that we stay within some sort of disciplined manner of getting this covered? Otherwise, I just fear that we'll just have these discussions and we go back and forth. Not that all these things are not interrelated, they are, but I'd like to see if we can make some progress by actually tackling something and getting something done after a meeting.
So I think it's a great suggestion that Tom made, and starting this way is as good as any. I do think that, you know, to your point that they're all related, and we talked about this last time we met, right? That you probably can't you can't have it all, right? And when you push down on one, another one pops up. And so it might make sense to, after we have the individual conversations, to sort of try to tie it all together at the end. But it probably makes sense to, this suggestion makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, thank you. One of the things that makes this most difficult, I think, is that none of these are like existential questions for the town. These are sort of goals that came out of the engagement sessions that the town ran, which I thought were very successful, very well attended, which ended up in the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan is a whole lot of broad policy statements without a whole lot of specificity with regard to targets, right? And that's fine too. I mean, comprehensive plans can go as far as you want them to go. This one didn't go that far, so far as to say that we need so many units or we need so much retail. It left it up to the next step in the process, which is fine. But in that there isn't that kind of specificity in the comprehensive plan. And in that these really aren't, you know, the town is not going to live and fall on whether it gets another 30,000 square feet of retail. It's just not. You know, it's not going to live and fall on whether it gets another 300 living units, multifamily units, or 200 multifamily. It's just not going to. These are goals, and these are things that return to an image, a vision of what people want the town to be, and those are all moving targets, and so it's really kind of tough to get a hold of it because it's like trying to push a string. So I thought it was a good idea to sort of push these one string at a time. And retail, for example, I mean, I think that there is a legitimate question as to whether the amount of retail that rezoning this part of the North Greeley Corridor would require is really required, right? I mean, to what objective? And it's not clear to me that people want a new white table restaurant, for example. Well, rezoning retail in North Greeley isn't going to guarantee a white table restaurant. And it's not entirely clear to me that white tablecloth restaurant, it's not clear to me that it's not going to put pressure on the amount of retail that's already there and sort of detract from the value of that retail. It's not clear that it's actually going to survive on North Greeley. Just as a planning, as a planning principle, there was a comment made, and I really have to apologize. I don't remember the town board member's name, and I apologize for that, but she said, what you need is an anchor there. And I think she's right, because that's a dead end street. And it's just not clear to me that mandating retail up in there is necessarily going to guarantee or even promote retail. And I think it's a good idea to decide just whether we really need more retail and whether it's the right place to do it, even if we did.
So I do think, well, when it comes to the question of retail there, I think that it can make sense. I don't think it's sort of obligated to go there. I think I mentioned last time that I think flexibility in ground floor uses makes a lot of sense to me, and sort of letting the market have some greater say as to what the ground floor use might be on that part of North Greeley. But I do want to keep in mind that while maybe not explicit, in my mind, what we as a town, what the town board ultimately does, I mean, we're just going to be making recommendations, but what we as a town in general do on North Greeley is in some sense not only indicative of what happens on North Greeley. It feels like it is somewhat of a test as to, again, not explicitly, but somewhat of a test as to, dipping our toe in the water of additional development further throughout the hamlet. And so I do think that we need to think of it not exclusively as the North Greeley, but as a place to think of how we might how that plays a part in the larger development, the future development or not of the rest of the hamlet. That said, when coming back to retail, I would love to have any kind of rezoning that is considered there provide for the option for ground floor retail. I think we've talked about this, critical mass and how we can't legislate the specific uses, right? Whether it's a restaurant or not, is challenging, and the size of it all, and that's challenging to legislate, right? Because that's where the market comes into play. But to give the flexibility, I think, is important.
I like that.
I think it makes good sense. And I think that forward looking in terms of the potential for the future and coordinating with whatever that future might be for the balance of the hamlet makes good sense. I think there's also some nuts and bolts that we can look at in terms of that flexibility. I agree. I think, Eldad, I couldn't agree with you more on flexibility. When you said it the other night at the meeting, I thought it was just terrific. That's the key, I think, because let the market rule on this. And to Tom's point at that meeting, he said, look, you can talk about legislating against certain kinds of activities and occupancies, but to legislate affirmatively for what you want to see is very, very difficult. But it seems to me that there's some nuts and bolts issues as well. There's some cost benefits just in terms of the layout and the structure, in terms of if retail is required and constructed. So your parking ratios are going to be different, so the needs are going to be different for parking, and that really impacts in terms of the density and where you're going to put this. So we have to think in those terms. If you say, for example, we don't want to require first floor commercial or retail, and now that gives us an opportunity for first floor residential. Perhaps that will negate the requirement or the necessity to build a fourth floor or a fifth floor, whatever the number of floors that ultimately people are going to be talking about. So those are some issues. And how does that all play out? Well, if you start going to 4 and 5 floors, even 4 floors, I've had informal conversations with some of the members of the fire department. It may require the additional purchase of additional equipment, just going to 4 floors. These are important issues. These are costs. Is it short term? Somewhat short term. I don't know how it works out, but these are issues I think that have to be looked at. But most importantly, and Sabrina's provided us with that information in terms of the parking requirements between residential and commercial, and some of that flexibility it seems to me is diminished with some of the commercial.
So you're getting, Bob, right to, I think, is really the core question for me anyway, is what's the opportunity cost of mandating residential? I'm sorry, mandating commercial. Because if you mandate it, I know we're just go with the mandate for the moment. I know we're probably not going to end up there, but if you end up with retail there, you eliminate pretty much a whole floor of residential, multifamily residential, which means you probably end up eliminating, I don't know how many affordable units. I mean, you like I said, you pull a string, right, and you end up pulling on other strings. you get more density, I believe, more density out of residential because of the parking than you do you get more development, right? Because of the parking out of residential development than you do commercial retail development. So what's the opportunity cost of, I don't know how many thousand square feet you get out of North Greeley, maybe 15,000, 20, I don't know. What's the footprint of Rite Aid? Is it 7,000, 6,000 square feet?
Yeah, probably, right.
Double
Mhm.
that for the other
Right,
side
yeah,
of this.
closer to 13.
Rite Aid's
1,000 square feet.
13?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Right,
So,
I also, so I want you to think about what's there today as you have this discussion, right? And I also want you to think about, if you have this discussion and you guys are bringing out really great points, there are, I think it's helpful to understand other, a restaurant, the parking lots that are there, the hours that they're utilized, kind of have that all in the back of your mind, because that's going to carry you through as you start putting the strings together. So.
Yeah, and I think another issue on the first floor housing perhaps is it may give us more flexibility for, disabled or elderly people who like to be on the first floor. And I think it really goes to, and this was something that the form-based code really tried to capture, it really gives you a different feel in terms of having residential on that first floor and perhaps having a little green space in front of every door on that front, that front door. And that gives a totally different feel. You're going to get density, but it's going to give a totally different feel for the streetscape. So again, to me, it's a potential benefit to have that flexibility. To Eldad's point, and perhaps I think one of the things that we took away from the form-based code when we were looking at the first floor was there would be a certain height. I can't recall, Sabrina, was it 14 or 16 feet in the first floor, which would be conducive to commercial retail, but would not be unlivable for residential.
It was first floor 16 if it was commercial, 11 if it was residential.
I think it's 11.6 for residential. I think that 11.
Yeah, it may have been. I can double check that. I can
that's
double
okay.
check.
I was just looking at earlier today. That's 6 inches one way or the other, but it's approximately 11. You're right, Sabrina. So first of all, if we're talking about allowing for the flexibility of retail on the ground floor, and you stipulate 16 feet, you have a floor to floor, I think, for retail on that street for the kind of retail you actually want, which is far in excess of what you need.
Yep.
And this is what the conversations in the form-based code discussion around building height have always been number of stories. We need to, I think, encourage the town board to talk about number of stories, obviously, but also talk about absolute height. Because the number of stories, if you say 4 stories, 16, 11.6, 11.6, 11.6, you got a 50-foot building by the time you're done with it, which is a 5-story building by anybody's calculation, anybody's perception. And the consultants made the argument, which I absolutely never bought, that you had to have 16 for retail, and you had to have 11.6, or nobody's going to build. It's going to be a disaster. It's just not true. And let's look at Village Main Street, Hamlet Main Street environments that have totally failed at 10-foot ground floors, 10, 11-foot ground floor retail. Bronxville, right? Katona. Are those shops failing? Are those towns failing because are those tenancies in trouble because they can't fit their shops in there? I mean, it's a specious argument, and I know where the argument comes from. I trust me, I know the argument comes from these developers who look at a different kind of development. They look at bigger box development. They look at bigger floor development. They have these models that they take with them from project to project to project, and talk to each other, and that's the current paradigm. But that does not apply, I don't think, to our town, and it's certainly not necessary. And so if we are going to say that there is there should be a choice for a developer to do retail or residential and let the market decide, let's be sure we get actually a building which works well for the street and can work well for both residential and for retail. And part of that, Bob, I think is right, is the relationship, I think you were alluding to this, the relationship of the building front to the curb and the amount of space between the sidewalk and the residential window, which is on the ground floor. There is a problem actually with ground floor residential in that in an urban environment, which is there's no privacy. People walk by and they can look in your window. And that's where sort of the raised floor comes from, where the first floor is sort of a half a story up. If you go into Manhattan, brownstone neighborhoods, they tuck another floor under there. But there are also solutions that I've seen in places like Gaithersburg, Maryland, which are contemporary solutions where there's a half a floor above, and under that is a level of parking. And the parking is not as expensive to build because it's only a half a floor down. You get ventilation all the way around, natural ventilation, so you have less of a problem ventilating space. You can landscape the front, and the first floor window, the sill of the first floor window is like 5 feet above the sidewalk level. So and that does not work for retail, obviously. I mean, it can work, Back Bay in Boston, it works, but that's a retrofit, which is just, they make do. So I would suggest that I don't disagree with the flexibility idea, let the market decide, but I think we ought to mandate a building shape, that a building configuration, which actually works well for both and helps us manage the ability to not have the street wall end up being higher than anybody wants it to be.
Tom, I think these are all excellent points. And I think that you're sort of creeping beyond just the retail discussion, as we knew we would, because it's impossible to just talk about one of these things. But they're all great points. I want to, yes. I don't know, but I suspect that when you're talking about all the developers wanting the 16 feet of floor to floor for retail and what they're looking for, my guess is national chains and lenders that are involved with national chains, that's what they're looking for, and they won't even look at an 11.6 floor to floor. They'll say, just take me to the next town, because so it might even get at some of the things we're looking to get at anyway. Again, I don't know. That is not my area of expertise. I just want to be clear about it. But I suspect that perhaps that's where some of that demand for the higher floor to floor is for some of these more, not big box per se, right? It's not a Target or a Costco, but more national chains. And when we're thinking about flexibility, I would also think that some of the flexibility doesn't have to be applied evenly. And when we're thinking about North Greeley, it isn't all the same, right? The properties as close to the intersection with King are very different than the ones, depending on how far we go away from that intersection past Rite Aid. I don't know how, again, last time we discussed, what kind of geographic limits are we talking about? I'd love to go as far as possible, but it doesn't have to be the same zoning and the same, commercial regulations or not for the properties closer to the intersection versus, to the traffic light then beyond, because those are different experiences. There's obviously traffic, car traffic, foot traffic, students from Bell and, you know, all that. And so they can be very different. And I would argue that perhaps it might make sense to, it all depends, you know, it depends what we think will be developed, how, you know, how far we want to go up the street, but something closer to a retail requirement on the ground floor makes more sense closer to the intersection, and then perhaps the greater flexibility as we go out. Just some, you know, more things to think about.
Right. Yeah,
But
good.
I think initially on the north side, it's just going to be up to the postal property. And after that, it gets harder to deal with new structures where there are existing structures that are in pretty good shape. So that's one thing. And then another question is, can we use the construction to block out the, you know, the view across the tracks, you know, where there's all the buses and all that other stuff, you know, so that's not an attractive view. But if you had a building that didn't have a lot of light on that side and you built it up a little higher, you know, it would be nice if we could have some kind of commercial as opposed to, you know, say more places where people can go and talk about financing, a bank, you know, something like that, or, you know, in that area. That might help, you know, with what the structures are going to be. We have banks, but, you know, maybe we need another one. I don't know. Of course, maybe we won't have that much money. Maybe we need fewer.
I think Eldad hit a very important point, and I think it's in the material that Sabrina gave to us too. It's in the plan, and that is, you know, as you go further out, you start to reach what we refer to as a transition zone, because there's more and more residential out there. So again, I think that makes these are excellent points. It's flexibility, and it's flexibility within the flexibility, but also recognizing that it's more residential out there. Mabel comes down that way. And, you know, for that reason, I think some good excerpt in that issue, the sections on transition zones. This is, I think, a very good example of it, where you might sequence your plan as you north really.
So Bob, it's really, really hard to understand what you're saying. Maybe you have your phone on and your computer at the same time. I don't know what's going on there, but but I did hear what you said. And yeah, I think that Eldad's, I agree with all of that. I'd like to clarify something. I think that it says in the form-based code, not that that's the code, but I think that that might be one of the principles that the town may be looking at with respect to the flexibility for retail versus residential on the ground floor. I think that it said that you would be required to build in these areas where retail is required. You'd be required to build a 16-foot floor to floor on the ground floor, and you could temporarily retrofit it with residential. And I think that there was some notion that you would have to come back every 5 years or something, or I forget, but that's not important for this discussion. I guess that, are we, when we're talking about this, are we suggesting that for every property that they should be allowed to do on North Greeley, all the way up to, say, the post office, they should be allowed to do retail on the ground floor and residential as they wish? Or are we suggesting that no, only within a certain area close to the intersection, and that it be designed specifically for retail? Those are two different things.
My sense is that would make, it seems to me that would make more sense.
The latter.
Eldad made that something closer to King Street would be the areas that we would look to see retail, because it really, you know, works in that central part of the hamlet. And then as we move further out, I don't know what the spaces are. then we start to sequence into something that gives flexibility. Then basically, we see perhaps mostly residential. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alton. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Bob. I actually, I'd like to walk it again and drive it and just kind of experience all of North Greeley. So I want to make sure that I'm talking about the right thing. If we're talking about, again, a lot of this feels very like hypothetical or theoretical, because we're saying if we're going all the way to the post office and how far beyond Rite Aid. So with the caveat that I'd like to walk it again and make sure that I know what I'm talking about. I would be supportive of the option for retail all the way up as far as I think we'd be willing to go to the post office. Again, the caveat that I want to see it again, and so I'll try to get there this week. But with the idea that, but not with Tom. Again, I think your points about 16-foot floor to floor and some sort of requirement that you prove hardship, or every 5 years you have to attest that whatever. I don't know if that's necessary, but flexibility all the way up, but perhaps either a mandate or some sort of incentive or encouragement closer to the King intersection. That would make sense to me, so that there is sort of the carryover from like the core of the hamlet. That's what makes sense to me. Feels right. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I agree, because I'm mindful. I know we're pulling the residential string again, but we are talking about the option to do residential, so it's embodied in the conversation, embedded in the conversation. There really are successful ways to do residential at street level, and there are less successful ways to do it. And and to do retail at the street level, and less successful ways to do it. So in the case that we are going to allow residential on the ground floor, I would be looking to understand how that actually works for the benefit of the resident living on the ground floor. Is that a good building to live in? And should we find ways to structure that somehow, either by a bigger setback or some specificity, maybe stoops that at least get you a couple feet off the ground. And I think that's one of the options, which actually is in the form-based code for residential. Be specific about that. And again, I'm not sure that the two things work together. Retail and residential in the same building work as well as for each of them. And I don't see anything wrong with being very definitive about those things and making regulations about those things. We have building codes for the sake of life safety and for ventilation and for light in units for the quality of life. And there's no reason why we can't apply those prerogatives to actually building street walls and how people live on the street in residential units on the street. So in principle, I'm not against it. But I also think we ought to hold that in abeyance until we have a conversation about residential and how it actually might work in this instance. Because there is an opportunity.
So in the spirit of trying to facilitate this discussion.
Thank you.
Do you want to move on to another area, reserve it for your next meeting? Are there any final words about retail that you'd like to share?
Well, one key word is flexible. It has to be flexible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you guys have brought up a lot of good points. Flexibility,
non-mandatory,
appropriate height of ceiling.
mindful
Livability,
of the transitions.
livability.
Yeah, and
Can-
there
can-
were suggestions on location for retail versus residential. So, it's a lot of good stuff. Here's a question for you. I know, Bob, that you had asked for this to be on every second meeting of the month. Depending on the temperament of everybody here, it may be worth putting it on every meeting so you can get through this list.
So I was going to ask, that's fine by me as well. I was going to ask just as far as timing. I know that at the meeting, at the joint meeting we had last time, there was discussion of sort of this trying to be a, maybe preemptive and forward thinking approach, as opposed to trying to be reactive and seeing what applications come. So I'm just curious if there's any thoughts as to the timing of, our comments or
There has been no conversations regarding timing, right?
Okay.
It is. What?
Has the moratorium been
They are discussing it tonight. The moratorium, there will be another moratorium put in place for 6 months. That is the plan. But again, I don't want to lose momentum with this, you guys. I think that there's enough time on your agenda. The market slowdown, I assume, is affecting applications in my office across all boards at the moment. So that you guys have the time. I think, if you go with the breakdown that Tom provided, then we talk about each singular thing, and then you have a more holistic conversation about everything. We're talking about 5 or 6 discussions. So, I'm thinking that you could get this accomplished within 2 months if we do it on every meeting. And if it takes you long,
Right.
that's fine too, because you have a moratorium that will be in place.
I agree. I think we could, some of these are going to take more time than others.
Mhm.
I think the last one is going to take probably the most time when we try and figure out what the heck we just did. But I think that there's no reason for us not to do it every meeting unless things just get crazy with our agendas.
If there's a heavy agenda, I'll speak with the chairman and we'll bump it. No harm, no foul. I think we need the flexibility. Look, there's that word again. And then, we could try and get it to a finish line.
Yeah, I think that it's always good to get the sort of conceptual thinking out early and offer that up to the town board as they go through their process, rather than us sort of catching up. I think it's better if we serve them better if we get to them sooner.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. Excellent point. I think that's a great suggestion, Sabrina.
Okay.
And I think we've kind of hit retail, we hit some good words and some good concepts. I'm going to try to put together just a little list of like an executive summary of what we talked about
Well,
tonight.
I have Felicia's been listening.
Okay.
So she can, if you, rather than, she can pull it out. She can pull it out and send it to everybody in an email, so it's fresh on top. You don't have to read through pages of documents.
Yeah, just a
And
short
you'll have it for the next discussion.
executive summary of the concepts that we've covered here this evening on retail. And I think we should look at that first thing the next time we meet on this, and then move on to the next topic. But my idea would be, at that point, we'd send that off to the town boards and here's where we are on retail, just so you know. Make sure, are we off the tracks? Are you unhappy with us? Are you just telling us, yeah, no way?
I wouldn't expect to get a response from the town board. And I'd also want you to make that determination if you want to send your conversation to them, because again, you're speaking about each of these items right now in isolation. And the hard conversation hasn't yet happened.
Right.
And I think that's where they really need your input.
Right. I think ultimately, as we talked about the other night, I think that hard conversation should be at a joint meeting again. And I think, again, they were talking about doing it every quarter. If we could pump this stuff out within, 6 weeks or so, now we're set up or staged for having a meaningful joint meeting, not just one to have coffee and donuts, but one that we can really start to sit down and say, well, how do we feel about this? This is what we've come up with. You're working on it as well. Where are we on this? What?
I think it's a great suggestion. And I think Tom's point about the ceiling heights, as compared to what was being studied, those are really good points to bring out and the reasons why. Because it speaks a lot to the type of developments that the community wants.
Yep.
So just one more point, which is we don't have to agree with each other on this stuff.
No, you
And I
don't.
suspect that in certain areas, we're not going to agree with each other. And the point is not for us to come up with, in my mind, a unified sort of planning board proposal on any of this stuff, as much as it is to have the best conversation we can about these things and then share it with them.
Yeah, no, and we can support that. And as we do the summaries of your discussion, we'll make sure that all the points are listed and that's not all one agreeing. I do think that everyone did agree about that flexibility, though.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, not that, with caveat.
With caveat, yes.
You have got
Caviar, did you say? I missed that. No, sorry.
We will be in person soon enough to have that caviar.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Very good.
Are there any, one last point from me anyway. Has anyone ever done a survey as to what the populace wants or needs? I mean, it's changed a lot. Even if it was done 3 years ago, it's probably out of date.
It was done 6 years ago. So, yeah, but it's again, to your point, it changes every 3 or 4 years. So again, it's market driven. So that's why I think it's so important to have flexibility, because you're going to have success, you're going to have failures, both residential and retail.
Maybe we
commercial.
Save this point for last.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
In case it takes us 3 years to get to there. No.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that what people wanted back then has really changed that much. I think that what they have begun to realize is that there are consequences to that list of things that they want to do. And I don't think they're going to say, well, gee, we don't want, a fancy restaurant. They're going to say, yeah, we still want the fancy restaurant. I think that that it's a matter of the town board now, I think, the town board now being realistic about the choices that can be effectuated in the context of what the broader wish list is. And I think that's real work that needs to be done. But I don't think the overall vision that people have of the hamlet is any different than is in the comprehensive plan. I think that it was interpreted, in my opinion, interpreted wrongly in the form-based code imagery that was put forward, and that's what people reacted to.
So I think that's a very valid point. I think that your discussions are going to help the town board understand where they need to weigh and balance the decision making.
Yep.
Story. And so that's what really needs to be done, is that there needs to be communication that identifies the, exactly what the points that you all are raising, and that balancing that needs to be achieved to meet the different goals. And there's different outcomes to meet every single goal you're trying to meet. Some are more aligned than others, and you guys are going to point all this out. So.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so you have 2 sets of minutes to adopt tonight. If this discussion can be tabled till the next time.
Yep. Let's table it and let's move on to our most important items, the minutes.
And also, if I can ask the board, just as a matter of course, right, and the lateness of the hour that we get into these discussions, do you want to put a loose time frame regarding this discussion?
Yep, I do.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Shoot for an hour to discuss the North Greeley subject, or an hour and a half, as opposed to carrying on for 3 hours?
Well,
no.
No, we just-
Yeah, I think the conversations are going to be useful. Look, we're going to be meeting in person, so that alone will take it out of us to a certain extent. But I don't know if we want to set a time limit. I think the most important thing is looking at the agenda to make sure that we have ample time in our agenda to discuss these items. So I guess, we just have to watch that. Again, we got a late start tonight because we had some meat on the agenda before, 2 applications that took a little bit of time. So I don't know when we started this conversation, but it wasn't much before 8:30, was it?
I don't think so. I would also say
No,
that,
you did. Yeah, you
Yeah.
did not start this before. It was about 8:45.
Yeah, so it's been less than an hour now. And this was, I think we would all agree, this is probably one of the easier topics
Yeah.
tonight. So I think an hour might be too short. I think an hour and a half might be too short. I think we should, talk until we really reach a conversation. Obviously, we're not going to go, I don't think we're going to go 3 hours. It can't possibly last that long.
Right, but also I will be cognizant of what the topic of the discussion is and make sure that the agenda lines up with that conversation.
Yes,
Thank
that'll
you.
be good. Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay, so I just needed some guidance from you on that. So
Yep.
thank you.
Great.
and we could carry over.
Oh, of
yes.
course,
We don't have,
of course.
Yes.
we don't have to end in one night if it goes
Of
long.
course. And I think we're going to have evenings where we're really going to say, gee, you know what, we need some more information. We need to know what that distance is. We might, and so, someone's going to have to do a little bit of research and get back to us so that we have that information. And again, Eldad mentioned he wants to drive it and walk it. At some point, it might not be a bad idea that if we just all go down there.
I was just
park
going
the
to say
car,
that.
and just walk it ourselves together.
Excellent.
And I
do it.
think that would be very useful. If you recall, the consultants actually did that with a number of people when they were doing their initial study, and they had a number of those walks out there. I think it could be very useful, again, for ourselves.
Your homework for next time, guys.
Oh, what?
Your homework is to go for a walk.
Okay, go for it. Okay, so we can coordinate that if we wish. It might be good to do it together.
So Sabrina says, take a hike. I got it. That's what I heard.
Listen, if you're coordinating a walk with more than 3 of you, that is a meeting and we have to notice it.
But if you're going to be talking substantively about it, so if you're just going to be observing and not having substantive discussion.
So they can't observe. So no, only 2 of you can go at a time. Pick a buddy.
Yeah, unless we notice it, maybe we'll notice it.
And we should notice it.
But let's do it at the end of the process after we talk through a bunch of these issues.
Yes, okay, fine. Good. Okay,
let's get to the minutes.
We have minutes of October 5.
I have no comments on either. I gave my one comment already to
I
Felicia.
sent my stuff into Felicia before. Does anyone have any substantive issues on October 5?
No.
If not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes of October 5?
So move.
Second? All in favor?
Yes.
Aye, yes, okay. We have now the minutes of October 19th. Again, any substantive issues, questions, problems?
Nope.
If not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes again as amended? Because I think some of us have sent some, wordsmithing changes in. But as amended, is there a motion to adopt the minutes of October 19th?
Motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. Terrific. Okay, it's carried. And we were all there for those meetings. Yes, good. Okay, great. Is there a motion then to close the meeting?
Motion.
Second? All in favor?
Yes.
Aye, terrific, great. All right, guys, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you.
discussion.
Good night.